The Chicago winter pressed against Bellissimo's floor-to-ceiling windows with savage intent, frost patterns crawling across glass like skeletal fingers. Inside the restaurant on North Rush Street, warmth and golden light spilled from crystal chandeliers, illuminating tables where Chicago's elite brokered deals that would never appear in boardroom minutes. The soft clink of stemware and murmured conversations created a soundtrack of wealth and discretion, an opulent bubble insulated from the bitter February night beyond. Janice Ferguson shouldered through the kitchen's swinging doors, balancing appetizer plates with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. She'd been on her feet for 7 hours, and the shift wouldn't end for another 3. Her sensible black shoes pinched despite their broken-in leather, but she kept her expression neutral, professional. At 29, Janice had mastered the art of reading a room before it could read her. In her crisp white shirt and black vest, she moved through the dining area with purpose, not invisible like some servers, but present enough to be competent, invisible enough to be forgotten. A survival skill honed over 13 years in restaurants where powerful men prefer their staff attentive but unmemorable. Tonight felt different. Janice couldn't identify what had shifted in Bellissimo's usual rhythm, but her instincts, sharpened by years of navigating volatile situations and dangerous men, screamed that something was about to break. She glanced toward the entrance as she set down plates at table 9, her hands steady despite the tension coiling in her shoulders. That's when she saw him. Durante Russo entered Bellissimo's like a storm front, his presence commanding immediate silence. The neck tattoo visible above his white collar marked him as someone who'd earned his power in ways that didn't involve business school. His tailored black vest and rolled sleeves suggested controlled violence, and when his dark eyes swept the room, even the chandeliers seemed to dim in deference. Janice had served powerful men before, hedge fund managers, politicians, corporate raiders. But Durante Russo was different. She saw it in how the maitre d's hand trembled slightly during the greeting, how the sommelier materialized without being summoned, how a ripple of awareness moved through the staff like electricity. This wasn't just wealth or influence. This was danger dressed in expensive fabric. Her manager, Vincent, appeared at her elbow, his usual swagger replaced with unusual gravity. Private room tonight, Janice. Table 1. Perfect service. Absolute discretion. 0 mistakes. His eyes held a warning. This man doesn't tolerate failure. Welcome back, my beautiful family. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for sticking with me. Your love and support mean everything. If you're excited for today's story and ready to soak it all in, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from. Tomorrow, I've got another captivating story lined up for you, and believe me, you won't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. Janice pushed through the velvet curtain into the private dining room, carrying a tray of entrees with mechanical precision. Durante Russo sat at the head of the mahogany table, his back to the wall, positioned to see both entrance and windows simultaneously. 4 other men occupied the remaining seats, their conversation pausing as she entered. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice professionally neutral as she set down plates. "The Osso Buco and the Branzino." Durante's eyes tracked her movement with predatory focus, but he said nothing. To his right sat Landro Toscani, a lean man in his 40s whose expensive suit couldn't disguise the prison yard tension in his shoulders. The others, Catherine Furr, Walter Hilbert, George Branham, barely acknowledged her presence. Good. Invisible was exactly where she needed to be. As she moved to refill water glasses, their conversation resumed. Business talk, carefully coded. Territories. Shipments. Arrangements. Janice had heard it all before in establishments like this, where powerful men discussed matters they didn't want recorded. She was reaching for Durante's glass when she saw it. Landro's hand moved across the table, ostensibly gesturing during conversation. But Janice caught the glint of a small vial palmed in his fingers, the subtle tilt as something dark and viscous dripped into Durante's whiskey glass. The motion took perhaps 3 seconds, practiced and smooth. Landro's face never changed. His other hand was pointing to documents spread before them, drawing Walter's attention to some detail. Janice's heart stopped. Time crystallized into sharp focus, the amber liquid in the glass, Durani's hand reaching for it, Landro's satisfied micro-expression. Her mind raced through possibilities. Walk away. Pretend she'd seen nothing. Call for help, no time. Alert Durani directly, that would expose her immediately. Every instinct screamed to stay invisible, stay safe, stay silent. But she'd never been good at staying silent. Durani's fingers closed around the glass stem, lifting it toward his lips. Janice moved on pure instinct. Her hand shot out, gripping the glass, and before her rational mind could intervene, she tipped the entire contents directly onto Durante's lap. Whiskey cascaded across his expensive trousers. Ice cubes scattered across white linen. The room detonated into shocked silence. Durante exploded from his chair with a roar that rattled the chandelier. What the fuck? His hand slammed on the table, face contorting with rage as amber liquid dripped from his vest. I'm so sorry, Janice heard herself say, though her voice sounded distant, disconnected. I slipped. Durante lunged across the table, his hand shooting out to grab her wrist. You clumsy. His face was inches from hers, dark eyes blazing with enough violence to stop her breath. The other men jumped to their feet. Landro's hand moved toward his jacket. But Janice held Durante's gaze, unflinching. The glass, she said quietly, urgently. Test the glass. Something shifted in Durante's expression. The rage didn't disappear, but comprehension flickered beneath it. Sharp, deadly comprehension. His grip on her wrist tightened for one more heartbeat, then released. When he spoke, his voice was lethal calm. Everyone stays. Lock the doors. The dining room doors slammed shut with finality that made Janice's pulse spike. Durante stood at the head of the table, whiskey still dripping from his vest, his presence filling the space like compressed violence waiting to detonate. George Branham moved to block the exit while Catherine Furr's calculating eyes assessed the situation with predatory intelligence. 1. Nobody leaves, Durante said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made disobedience unthinkable. Somebody get me Marcus. Now. Walter Hilbert was already on his phone, speaking in urgent undertones. Landro Toscani had gone very still, his earlier ease replaced with something that looked like calculation. Janice caught his eyes flicking toward the exit, toward the windows, measuring distances. Durante's gaze locked on her. You. Sit. Janice remained standing, her servers training warring with her survival instincts. She'd just dumped whiskey on Chicago's most dangerous man. Every rational cell in her body screamed to run, but her defiant streak, the one that had gotten her through 13 years of volatile situations, kept her feet planted. I said sit, Durante repeated, his tattooed neck flexing with controlled rage. The ink seemed to writhe in the chandelier light. I'm fine standing, Janice heard herself say. The words came out steadier than she felt. Something dangerous flickered across Durante's face. Not quite amusement, but close. He moved around the table with predatory grace until he was standing directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the amber flecks in his dark eyes, smell the whiskey soaking his expensive clothes. You just cost me $3,000 in tailoring, he said softly. You want to explain why? Janice met his gaze without flinching. Check the glass first. Then ask me again. The tension in the room ratcheted higher. Catherine Furr leaned forward, interest sharpening her features. George Branham's hand had drifted inside his jacket. Landro stood very carefully still, but Janice noticed the slight sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the room's comfortable temperature. The door opened. A thin man with wire-rimmed glasses entered carrying a leather case, Marcus, apparently. Durante gestured toward the table without taking his eyes off Janice. The whiskey glass. Everything in it. I want to know what's there that shouldn't be. Marcus moved with efficient precision, carefully transferring the remaining liquid and ice into vials, sealing them with practiced ease. I'll need 20 minutes for a full spectrum analysis. You have 10, Durante said. And Marcus? If you find what I think you're going to find, you call me immediately. Not later. Immediately. Marcus nodded and disappeared through the door, leaving behind a silence so thick it felt suffocating. Durrani still hadn't moved from his position inches from Janice. His gaze catalogued every detail, her steady hands, her unflinching posture, the barely perceptible tension in her shoulders. "What's her name?" he asked. "Janice Ferguson." "Well, Janice Ferguson." Durranti's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. "You better hope you're right about that glass. Because if this is some kind of game, some setup, some distraction for something bigger," his tattooed neck flexed again as he leaned closer. "You'll wish you'd just let me drink it." Janice held his stare, refusing to give him the fear he was clearly accustomed to inspiring. "Test the glass," she repeated quietly. "Then decide if I'm the enemy." Durrani's phone buzzed. He answered without looking away from her. "Talk." Whatever Marcus said made Durranti's expression shift from controlled rage to lethal calm. When he lowered the phone, his eyes held a different kind of intensity. No longer fury, but something more complex. Respect, maybe. Or calculation. "Cyanide," he said flatly. "Enough to drop me in 15 minutes. His gaze shifted to Landro Toscani. "Interesting, don't you think?" 1. https://ppl-ai-file-upload s3 amazon.ws/ed6617959/64882e1-ed23-4c95-917-dab109001e14d/main-1 jpg. Janice pushed through her apartment door at 1:47 a.m., exhaustion settling into her bones like lead. Durrani had kept her at Bellissimo's for 3 hours after Landro Toscani was dragged away by two men who looked like they crushed concrete for recreation. The interrogation had been thorough, professional, and terrifying in its quiet intensity. But he'd let her go. With a business card bearing only a phone number and a warning delivered in that lethal calm voice. "They'll come for you. When they do, call me." Janice had nodded, pocketed the card, and walked out into the Chicago night determined to pretend the last 4 hours hadn't happened. She just wanted her apartment, her textbooks, her normal life. The door swung open too easily. No resistance from the deadbolt she always engaged. Her stomach dropped. The apartment had been gutted. Furniture overturned, cushions slashed, books scattered like shrapnel across the floor. Her laptop, the one with all her DePaul coursework, smashed against the wall. Drawers pulled out, contents dumped, every private space violated. Janice stood frozen in the doorway, her server's instinct for reading dangerous situations screaming warnings. Whoever did this might still be here. She should leave. Call the police. Call. Her eyes caught movement. The bathroom mirror reflected streetlight through her bedroom window. Across the glass, scrawled in what looked like her own lipstick, a message. Should have stayed invisible. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone. Not Durranti's number. Not yet. She'd handled worse than this. She'd survived worse than. The window exploded. Janice dropped instinctively as gunfire tore through her apartment, glass and plaster erupting in violent bursts. 3 shots. 4. She scrambled behind the overturned couch, heart hammering against her ribs, ears ringing from the concussive noise. The shooting stopped, leaving only the sound of car tires screeching below. She waited, counting seconds, tasting copper and fear. 30 seconds. 60. Silence except for her ragged breathing and distant sirens. Janice pulled herself upright, glass crunching under her shoes. The bullets had carved a line across her living room wall, exactly where she would have been standing if she hadn't dropped. Professional. Calculated. A warning shot, or a failed execution. Her phone rang, Durranti's unknown number flashing on the screen. She stared at it, pride warring with survival instinct. Accepting his help meant accepting his world, his protection, his control. Everything she'd fought against since she was 16 and learned that powerful men always demanded payment for their assistance. She let it ring out. 2 minutes later, pounding on her door. "Janice Ferguson. Durranti sent us." She opened the door to find 2 men in dark suits, faces professionally neutral. The taller one, the same one who dragged Landro away, scanned her apartment with clinical efficiency. "You're coming with us," he said. "Not a request." "I'm fine," Janice said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'll handle this myself." The man's expression didn't change. "Miss Ferguson, there are 3 more shooters positioned in buildings surrounding this location. You have 30 seconds to decide if you want to live long enough to regret your pride." Janice looked at her destroyed apartment, at the message on her mirror, at the bullet holes in her wall, then at the card in her pocket with Durante Russo's number. "I don't need anyone's protection," she said. The window beside her head exploded. The security guard tackled her to the floor as bullets shredded the air where she'd been standing. The lecture hall at DePaul was half empty when the fire alarm screamed to life. Janice looked up from her financial analysis textbook, annoyance flashing through exhaustion. She'd gotten 3 hours of sleep on Durante's security team's safe-house couch before demanding they bring her to campus. She had a midterm in 2 days. Her life wasn't stopping because some Mafia boss thought she needed babysitting. "Everyone out," the professor called over the alarm. "Single file. Use the north exit." Janice gathered her materials with the rest of the students, filing toward the door. Durante's guard, the tall one Marco, moved with her, his hand inside his jacket. She'd tried to lose him twice already this morning. They were halfway down the stairwell when Marco's phone buzzed. His expression shifted, hardening. "Miss Ferguson, we need to leave. Now." "There's a fire alarm." "There's no fire." He grabbed her arm, pulling her back up the stairs against the flow of students. The alarm was triggered remotely. "There are 2 men with firearms positioned at the north exit. They're waiting for you." Janice's defiance crumbled into cold fear. "How do you?" "Because Mr. Russo has eyes everywhere you go." Marco keyed his radio. "Package is compromised. Extracting through West Service Corridor." 10 minutes later, Janice was in an armored SUV, watching Chicago blur past tinted windows as they headed north toward the Gold Coast. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Durante's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower overlooking Lake Michigan. The elevator required both a keycard and fingerprint scan. When the doors opened directly into his living space, Janice stepped into a world of floor-to-ceiling windows, modern art, and money so old it didn't need to announce itself. Durante stood near the windows, phone to his ear, his back to the view. He wore different clothes, black shirt, no tie, the neck tattoo more visible in the afternoon light. When he saw her, he ended the call. "You're staying here," he said. "Not a suggestion." "The hell I am." Janice's fear was converting to fury. "I have a life, Durante. I have school, You have a target on your back." His voice carried that lethal calm that was somehow more frightening than shouting. "Alberto Castiglione wants you dead because you can identify Landro. Ivana Connie wants you dead because you're a loose end. And whoever else is involved in this conspiracy wants you dead because they don't know what you saw or who you've told. So, I'm just supposed to hide here? Give up everything I've worked for? You're supposed to stay alive long enough for me to find who's trying to kill you." They stood across the vast living room, 2 immovable forces. The tension crackled between them like electricity. The elevator chimed. A woman emerged, steel-gray hair, sharp suit, sharper eyes. Catherine Furr, Durante's consigliera. Behind her came Alice Morrow with her tablet and calculating expression, Janet Earls carrying security equipment, Walter Hilbert adjusting expensive cufflinks, and George Branham, whose ambitious energy filled the room. Durante's inner circle, the people who ran his empire. "Gentlemen, Catherine," Durante said. "Meet Janice Ferguson, the woman who saved my life and complicated everything." Janice had been trapped in Durante's penthouse for 4 days, and the walls were closing in. She'd paced the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan so many times she'd memorized every sailboat, every whitecap, every cloud formation. Her DePaul professors were emailing about missed assignments. Her carefully constructed life was disintegrating while she played prisoner in a gilded cage. Durante's dining table had been converted into a war room. Financial records, organizational charts, surveillance photos, evidence of his empire spread across mahogany like a corporate autopsy. Catherine Furr and George Branham had been running the investigation for 3 days with nothing to show for it. "We're missing something," Catherine said, frustration cracking her usual composure. "The money has to be moving somewhere. Conspiracies this size require funding." Janice stood near the windows, trying to ignore them. This wasn't her world, wasn't her problem. Except the shooters who'd tried to kill her twice said otherwise. She glanced at the financial statements scattered across the table. Years of waitressing had taught her to observe without seeming to. And 2 years of financial analysis at DePaul had taught her to see patterns others missed. "May I?" she heard herself ask. Catherine looked up, surprise flickering across her features. Durante, who'd been on a call in his office, emerged with that predatory focus that made Janice's spine straighten defensively. "By all means," he said, gesturing toward the table. Janice moved to the documents, her trained eyes scanning columns of numbers. Shell corporations, offshore accounts, real estate holdings, standard laundering infrastructure. But something was off. The timing of transfers, the amounts, the routing patterns through Walter Hilbert's legal accounts. "These don't make sense," she said, pulling 3 different statements together. "Look, Hilbert's processing legitimate business payments, but every third transaction is exactly 7% higher than it should be. That's not random variance. That's systematic skimming." Durante moved beside her, close enough that she caught the scent of expensive cologne and controlled danger. "Show me." Janice's fingers traced the pattern across spreadsheets, her business analytics training kicking in with the familiar comfort of numbers and logic. "Here, here, and here. He's routing excess through these accounts. They look legitimate, registered to existing businesses in your portfolio. But if you cross-reference the actual invoices Catherine has filed, the amounts don't match." George Branham leaned in, his ambitious energy sharpening. "That's over $2 million in 6 months. 2.3 million, Janice corrected automatically. "And it's all flowing to this account." She tapped a statement. "Registered to a consulting firm in the Caymans. Wanna bet who owns it?" Durante's expression had shifted from skepticism to something harder, more calculating. He was looking at her differently now, not as the waitress who'd dumped whiskey on him, but as someone who'd just handed him a weapon. "Walter's been stealing," Catherine said softly, her voice carrying lethal implications. "Or funding a coup," Durante countered. He turned to Janice, studying her with that intensity that made her feel simultaneously seen and exposed. "Where did you learn to do that?" "DePaul. Financial analysis and forensic accounting." Janice met his gaze, without flinching. "I'm 2 months from graduating. Was anyway, before your world swallowed mine. Your world just saved my organization $3 million and identified a traitor." Durante's voice carried something that might have been respect. "Maybe you're not just a waitress after all." "I was never just a waitress," Janice said quietly. For the first time since they'd met, Durante smiled, sharp, dangerous, and genuine. Walter Hilbert disappeared 3 hours after Janice exposed his financial trail. His Gold Coast apartment was empty, his offshore accounts drained, his burner phones disconnected. Durante's people found his car abandoned at O'Hare with a one-way ticket to Sao Paulo, purchased 2 weeks before Landro's poison attempt. "He knew," Catherine first said, standing at Durante's war room table. "He knew the assassination was coming and had his exit strategy ready." But something in her voice made Janice look up from the financial records she'd been analyzing. A slight hesitation, a careful neutrality that didn't quite fit. Janice had spent 13 years reading people's micro-expressions, and Catherine's mask had just slipped. Durante caught it too. His dark eyes tracked Catherine with predatory focus. "You've been quiet during strategy sessions, Catherine. Unusual for you." "I'm processing," Catherine said smoothly. "We've just lost our attorney and discovered our financial infrastructure has been compromised. Forgiveness if I'm being cautious about our next moves." Janice watched the exchange, her instincts screaming warnings. Catherine was too composed, too careful. And she'd been the one managing Walter's legal accounts for years. How had she missed $2 million disappearing? George Branham entered the penthouse, his expensive suit rumpled like he'd slept in it. Janet's running background checks on everyone who had access to the private dining room that night. Full digital forensics. Where have you been? Durrani's question carried an edge. Marco said you weren't at the warehouse this morning. George's ambitious energy flickered with something defensive. Following up on Landro's known associates. I sent you my report. I didn't receive it. The silence stretched taut. George's hand moved unconsciously toward his phone, then stopped. Catherine's posture had shifted, her calculating gaze moving between Durrani and George like she was recalculating odds. Janice's phone buzzed, the secure device Durrani had given her. A message from Janet Earls. *, don't trust George. His phone pinged at Ivana Connie's hotel twice this week. Check Catherine's offshore accounts. Same Cayman bank as Walter. *. Janice's blood went cold. She looked up to find Durrani watching her, reading her expression with that unnerving intensity. She turned the phone so he could see the message. Durrani's tattooed neck flexed as he absorbed the information, his controlled violence barely restrained beneath expensive fabric. When he looked at Catherine and George, his voice carried lethal calm. Janice, go to my office. Lock the door. Durrani, Catherine began. Now, Janice. Janice didn't argue. She moved toward the office, catching George's hand drifting inside his jacket, seeing Catherine's calculating expression shift to survival mode. The penthouse had become a powder keg, and Durrani was about to light the fuse. Behind her, Durrani's voice carried through the closing door. We're going to have a conversation about loyalty, and trust, and consequences. The gunshot made Janice flinch. Then silence. Then Durrani's voice, colder than Chicago winter. Anyone else want to try me? In his office, surrounded by bulletproof glass overlooking the lake, Janice realized she'd just witnessed Durrani Russo remind his organization why he was still breathing when so many others weren't. The question was whether she could trust him, or if she'd just aligned herself with the most dangerous piece on the board. George Branham's body was gone by the time Janice emerged from Durrani's office 20 minutes later. The penthouse had been cleaned with professional efficiency, no blood, no evidence, just the lingering scent of gunpowder and consequences. Catherine first sat on the leather couch, hands zip-tied behind her back, her calculating composure finally shattered into something resembling fear. Durrani stood by the windows, his tattooed neck still flexed with controlled rage. Alice is on her way up. She has information you need to hear. Alice Morrow? Janice's confusion must have shown. Your financial controller? She's been here twice this week and barely said 3 words. That's because she's been busy. Durrani's voice carried grim satisfaction. Busy doing exactly what I asked her to do 6 months ago when I first suspected someone inside my organization was planning a coup. The elevator chimed. Alice Morrow stepped out carrying a tablet and a thick folder, her usual quiet demeanor replaced with focused intensity. She glanced at Catherine's restrained form with clinical detachment before addressing Durrani. I have everything, Alice said, setting the folder on the table. George Branham has been the primary insider for 18 months. He coordinated with Alberto Castiglione and Ivana Connie to systematically weaken your operational infrastructure while positioning himself to take control after your assassination. Janice moved closer, drawn by the same analytical curiosity that had exposed Walter's financial trail. The folder contained surveillance photos, recorded conversations, wire transfer records, months of gathered intelligence. George recruited Walter 6 months ago, Alice continued, her voice steady. Catherine was approached 3 months ago but claimed neutrality, which in this business means complicity. Janet Earls has been compromised through her nephew. They're holding him in a warehouse on the south side as leverage. Durrani's expression darkened. Location? Alice provided coordinates, without hesitation. I have a team extracting him now. Once Janet knows he's safe, she'll testify against the conspiracy. She's been feeding the information while pretending to be compromised. How deep does this go? Janice asked, her business training kicking in as she scanned financial documents. The numbers told a story of systematic betrayal, diverted shipments, compromised security, sabotaged operations. 12 people in your organization, Alice said. Alberto and Ivana have been planning this for 2 years. They wanted complete control, your territory, your connections, your infrastructure. The assassination was just the opening move. They were going to blame it on a rival family, create chaos, then position George as the unifying leader. Durante was silent, processing. When he finally spoke, his voice carried lethal calculation. You've been gathering this intelligence for 6 months. Why wait until now? Because until Landro put poison in your glass, I didn't have enough evidence to prove conspiracy. And until Janice exposed Walter's financial trail, I didn't have the complete money flow. Alice met Durante's gaze without flinching. You told me to be thorough. I was thorough. And Catherine? Durante glanced at his restrained consigliera. Guilty of cowardice, not conspiracy, Alice said. She knew something was wrong but chose self-preservation over loyalty. That's for you to judge. The penthouse filled with weighted silence. Janice realized she was watching Durante Russo dismantle a coup with the same controlled precision he applied to everything else, methodical, ruthless, and absolutely certain. Get Janet's nephew to safety, Durante finally said. Then we're going to have a conversation with Alberto and Ivana. And this time, I'm bringing Janice. The message came through Alice's encrypted network at 3 a.m. Alberto Castiglione wanted to negotiate. Neutral territory. A waterfront warehouse in the industrial district. Just Durante and 2 guards. Peace, he claimed, was better than mutually assured destruction. It's a trap, Janice said from her position at the war room table, surrounded by financial records she'd been analyzing for 6 hours. Her eyes were bloodshot, but her mind was sharp. Look at these transactions. Alberto purchased that warehouse 3 weeks ago through a shell corporation. And these equipment rentals? High-powered rifles. Thermal imaging. He's been planning this ambush since before Landro tried to poison you. Durante studied the documents, his tattooed neck catching the pre-dawn light filtering through the penthouse windows. Obviously, it's a trap. The question is how we turn it against them. We don't, Janet Earls said, her loyalty restored now that her nephew was safe. You don't walk into an ambush, even if you know it's coming. Yes, I do. Durante's voice carried finality. Because Alberto and Ivana need to believe they're winning. And because the only way to end this is to force their hand where I control the variables. Then I'm coming with you, Janice said. Durante's dark eyes locked on hers with that intensity that made her feel simultaneously challenged and respected. Absolutely not. You need evidence, Janice countered, standing her ground like she had that first night at Bellissimo's when she'd poured whiskey on the most dangerous man in Chicago. You need recordings, confessions, something that proves conspiracy. Otherwise, this just becomes another gang war with no resolution. I can get you that evidence. You can also get yourself killed. I've already been shot at twice. What's a third time? Her defiance sparked between them, familiar and electric. Besides, you need someone they'll underestimate. Someone who doesn't look like a threat. That's me, just a waitress who got lucky once. Durante was silent for a long moment, weighing variables with that calculating mind she'd come to recognize. Finally, he nodded. You stay in the car. Bulletproof, protected position. You record everything. At the first sign of trouble, Marco drives you out. Non-negotiable. Deal. The warehouse squatted beside the Chicago River like a corpse, its windows dark, its loading docks empty. Durante's SUV pulled up precisely at 8 a.m., headlights cutting through morning fog. Janice sat in the back seat, phone recording, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the windshield, she watched Durante emerge with Marco and Janet, their movements deliberate and controlled. Alberto Castiglione waited at the warehouse entrance with Ivana Connie and 6 armed men, 3 more than agreed upon. Already cheating, Janice murmured, her phone capturing everything. Alberto's voice carried across the space, arrogant and assured. Durante, come to discuss terms? Come to end this, Durante replied, his tattooed neck visible even from Janice's distance. You tried to kill me. Failed. Tried to destroy my organization from inside.
Failed.
Now you want peace? Or just another chance? Always so dramatic, Ivana said, her strategic mind evident in her positioning. Her men had clear firing lines on Durante's position. We're offering you a way out. Retire. Walk away. Live. Durante's laugh was dark and genuine. You poisoned my whiskey. Shot at the woman who saved me. Compromised my organization. And now you think I'll just walk away? You don't have a choice, Alberto said, and his hand moved in signal. The trap sprung. Gunmen emerged from elevated positions, red laser sights painting Durante's chest. But Durante didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled. That dangerous, controlled expression Janice had come to recognize as his most lethal weapon. Neither do you, Durante said.
Now.
The warehouse erupted. The December wind off Lake Michigan cut through DePaul's graduation ceremony with characteristic brutality, but Janice Ferguson barely felt it. She stood among her fellow graduates in cap and gown, clutching her diploma, the piece of paper she'd fought 13 years to earn. Bachelor of Science in Financial Analysis and Forensic Accounting. Summa cum laude, despite missing half a semester while hiding from assassins and dismantling a Mafia conspiracy. Her eyes scanned the crowd of families and found him immediately. Durante Russo sat in the back row, his tailored charcoal coat doing nothing to disguise what he was. The neck tattoo was visible above his collar, and his presence caused ripples of whispered recognition through the audience. Chicago's most dangerous man, attending a college graduation like a proud parent. Their eyes met across the distance. He nodded once, acknowledgement, respect, something more complex than either word could capture. After the warehouse confrontation 10 months ago, Alberto Castiglione and Ivana Cani had faced federal racketeering charges. The recordings Janice captured, combined with Alice Morrow's gathered intelligence, had been enough to dismantle the conspiracy through legal channels. Durante had kept his promise, justice, without unnecessary bloodshed. Mostly. Landro Toscani's body had been found in the Chicago River 3 days after the warehouse. Durante claimed ignorance. Janice didn't ask questions. The ceremony concluded, and Janice navigated through congratulating classmates toward Durante. He stood as she approached, and for a moment they were back in Bellissimo's dining room, her pouring whiskey on his lap, his explosive rage, that crystallized instant before everything changed. Congratulations, Durante said, his voice carrying genuine warmth beneath its usual controlled edge. Thank you for coming. Janice adjusted her cap, suddenly self-conscious. I know this isn't exactly your scene. You earned it. He gestured toward the diploma. Every hour of it. I'm proud of you. The words hit harder than she expected. Janice had spent 10 months rebuilding her life, finishing her degree, launching Ferguson Forensic Consulting with Durante's $200,000 investment structured as a proper business loan with market-rate interest. She'd repaid $87,000 already, ahead of schedule, proving the point she'd needed to prove, that she could accept help without surrendering independence. The Patterson case settled yesterday, she said, shifting to business because emotion made her uncomfortable. My analysis exposed $4.3 million in fraud. The client's paying my full fee plus referral bonus. I heard. Durante's smile held that dangerous edge she'd learned meant he was pleased. You're building quite a reputation. Legitimate, legal, exactly what you wanted. They stood in the December cold, two people who'd forged an unlikely partnership in violence and conspiracy. She'd saved his life with reckless audacity. He'd protected hers with ruthless efficiency. And somewhere between poisoned whiskey and warehouse ambushes, they discovered mutual respect that transcended their different worlds. Dinner tonight? Durante asked. Bellissimo's private dining room. I promise no one will try to poison me. Janice laughed, genuine, unguarded. Only if I get to pour the drinks. I wouldn't trust anyone else. As they walked toward his waiting car, Janice caught their reflection in the building's glass, a graduate in cap and gown beside a Mafia boss in expensive wool. It shouldn't work. By every logical measure, it was impossible. But 10 months ago, She poured whiskey on Chicago's most dangerous man and refused to apologize. That moment of defiant audacity had changed everything. Some foundations she'd learned were built in fire. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and be part of a community that cherishes unforgettable tales like this one. Your support means more than you know. It fuels the creation of even more stories that speak to the heart. So, whether you're watching from your TV or your phone, take a moment to join us. Every like, every subscription, every share helps us continue bringing these stories to life. Thank you for being a part of this journey.